Hey everyone, it's Connor. Today I wanted to talk about media moderation and the recent ban of the infamous neo-Nazi Nick Fuentes. More specifically, how the right has prostituted itself to defend people like Fuentes, irrespective of their previous positions. For those unfamiliar with Fuentes, he's the leader and self-proclaimed founder of the Groypers, a far-right group of young trolls obsessed with hating anyone who isn't white. Recently, they have been dealt a blow by Twitter, as yet another platform gave their famous racist the boot. The ban on Twitter is just the most recent example of Fuentes being driven from a major platform. In 2020, he was banned from YouTube for his repeated violations of its hate speech policy. He was on DLive for a while, being one of their most successful earners, but he was soon banned from there as well. While most people were happy to see such a virulent racist like Fuentes removed from Twitter, several right-wing pundits protested against the ban, arguing that it was dangerous to public discourse, seemingly seeing no irony in defending a Nazi for the good of public discussion. Michael Knowles, the host of The Michael Knowles Show, tweeted out his support for Fuentes' continued presence on the site, seemingly arguing that you have to be charged with the crime in order to face the consequences of your actions and words. Far from being alone, Knowles was joined by Ben Shapiro, who tweeted out his support for Fuentes staying on the site, despite his personal hostility towards Fuentes. Holocaust denier and self-described occultist Tarl Warwick also made a video defending him and blaming the ADL for his ban.
Things that he said, like he must get constantly reported. It's actually strange that they didn't, because usually Twitter is really has a trigger finger when it comes to banning people. They've taken down some of my tweets before that were totally innocuous. And Jack Dorsey is clearly not a fan of the concept of free expression, although he continues to talk about it. And by the way, this is a total coincidence, but this is less than 24 hours after the ADL puts out their hit piece about Nick Fuentes. So ADL puts out the hit piece, a few hours later, Nick's no longer on Twitter. Totally coincidental.
Others, like Gavin Wax, an insider at Newsmax and writer for Town Hall, has also downplayed the significance of Fuentes' prejudice.
But we can dive into them specifically.
So what do you think about Nick Fuentes getting banned from Twitter and some of his ideas? Because obviously he's a very controversial figure, and I don't think he's controversial just because of his sort of populism, but I think that might be a component. Are you familiar with his work, what he does, what his kind of background is, and what happened recently with that on Twitter?
Fuentes?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, he says things that I could agree with, and I think a lot of people on the right should agree with, and sometimes he says things I don't agree with, but I view a lot of people like that. I think there's a lot of hysteria surrounding Nick Fuentes. I think a lot of people lose their minds over him for whatever reason. He has a right to free speech, right to a platform. He has a right not to be added to a no-fly list. He has a right not to have his bank account seized. He has a right.
His bank account was seized?
I think he was locked out of his bank accounts.
That stuff scares me. That scares me.
No,
that happened to the CEO of Gab too, right?
Exactly, and this is why you may not agree with him. You may find some of the things he says reprehensible. You may not like what he says or how he says it, but you should be able to have a principled stand, which I have, to say that what's happening to him in these aspects are wrong. And
all of this may appear to be a principled stance against censorship, but it is nothing more than an act of cowardice by the very men who have long flirted with far-right propaganda through their denial of systemic racism. For some, it represents a weakness of character and an inability to defend one's movement from those who abuse it. In the case of Shapiro, his statements in support of Fuentes fly in the face of his previous hostility to Fuentes and the far right.
Turns out not all that many Americans agree with you. After all, your agenda is pretty disgusting. You also happen to have the unfortunate habit of saying really disgusting things when you think other people aren't listening. For example, your thought leaders, your self-proclaimed lead influencers, will say they're not on the same page as white supremacist Richard Spencer, but then they'll go on Facebook and post about the Charlottesville white supremacist rally, quote, "The rootless transnational elite know that a tidal wave of white identity is coming, and they know that once the word gets out, they will not be able to stop us. The fire rises." Really hiding the ball there, are you? Let's say that your self-proclaimed lead influencer has compared Alex Jones's ban from social media, a ban, by the way, which I opposed publicly, to a modern Kristallnacht and the beginning of a white Holocaust. But when it comes to the Holocaust itself, you have some questions. You do. Right? Those questions are questions like this. This is a direct quote from a lead influencer in the alt-right. Matt says, "If I take 1 hour to cook a batch of cookies and Cookie Monster has 15 ovens working 24 hours a day, every day for 5 years, how long does it take Cookie Monster to make 6 million batches of cookies?" I don't know, that's a good question. No, that doesn't sound really correct to me. Wait a second, it takes 1 hour to build a batch of cookies, and you have 15 ovens, probably in 4 different kitchens, right, doing 24 hours a day for 5 years? How long would it take to get to 6 million? I don't know, it certainly wouldn't be 5 years, right? The math doesn't seem to add up there. None of it really adds up, none of it really makes sense. This crazy cookie analogy, 6 million cookies? Nah, I don't buy it. That's all irony. I'm an irony bro. That's all irony. This is the kind of stuff some of these folks are saying.
Despite his supposed firm position, Shapiro is fully aware that his audience is just as compromised of the same far-right actors he condemns, many of whom will readily defend Fuentes from allegations of prejudice or racism, even if it's in bad faith.
Hi. So in 2016, you tweeted out a list of 20 people that you called alt-right or alt-right friendly. It included Ron Paul, Pat Buchanan, Ann Coulter, and even Donald Trump. Recently, you gave a speech at Stanford about Nick Fuentes, who you called an alt-right lead influencer. My question is this: it seems like conservatives like you, like Charlie Kirk, like Dan Crenshaw, feel threatened by America First conservatives and America First ideas. Is this why you're smearing them as alt-right, racist, homophobic, and all these other things, instead of actually addressing their ideas and debating them?
So, first of all, I'm happy to address any ideas. I'm not happy to debate somebody who has joked about murdering me. That's Fuentes.
And it isn't all that surprising, considering that Shapiro himself has long cast doubt on accusations of systemic racism and other elements of prejudice in the United States. You can't cast doubt on racism in America without simultaneously convincing your audience that it is all a hoax, something Shapiro is now having to learn the hard way. Others like Michael Knowles have also struggled to deal with their positions on Nick Fuentes. Knowles famously condemned him as attempting to distance his party and brand from America First fascism.
Holocaust and supported Jim Crow. I forgot about that. But anyway, he did. It's on video. You can check it out. For the home audience, you can check it out.
Hi, Mr. Knowles. First, I just want to say that I'm a big fan. I feel like a lot of times in your past, you've defended Christian values, and I respect you for that, even on issues that may not be so popular, such as same-sex marriage or men are not women, etc. My question is also regarding the event at Politicon in which Mr. Nicholas J. Fuentes took a picture with you, and then only an hour and 20 minutes afterwards, you tried to slander him by associating him with racial bigotry and the alt-right, as you just said. The alt-right, which you describe as godless. Now, Mr. Fuentes disavows racial hatred. He tries to disassociate with it. He also has a lot of minority supporters, as we've seen at recent events. A lot of minority supporters have come out in favor of him. So I don't think it's really fair to characterize him as a racial bigot. And he is also a devout Christian. And the reason I mention this specifically, obviously, a picture in itself doesn't mean anything. You don't have to disagree, or you don't have to agree with anything that someone who takes a picture with you says, such as with Lady MAGA. It's perfectly fine to take a picture with him. But my problem is that you have a very different reaction when it comes to either of them. When it comes to a young America First conservative like Mr. Fuentes, you slander them, trying to associate
I
them
never
with
slandered that person. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
But I'll explain to you what happened. I'll explain to you what happened and why I'm much more happy to take a photo with somebody like Lady MAGA, who obviously were very different people, but agree on certain things, than I am with somebody like Nick Fuentes, which is that Lady MAGA is a nice guy, and we had a nice conversation, and we were very open, and it was a good faith discussion. And Nick Fuentes lied to my face, then lied about me on the internet, and then only when I figured out who he was because I Googled him, I realized, and some might try to refute this in the room, but it's all on video, that he has endorsed Jim Crow segregation. He has denied that the Holocaust happened. He has associated himself with fascism openly. He said if Antifa were fascist, he would be marching alongside them. He has associated in the past with avowed racial bigots like James Alsop and Richard Spencer, though apparently now they're having something of a tiff from what I gather on the blogs. It is quite clear to me that he harbors racial bigotry. That's why I reject his politics. The reason I reject his photo is because he lied to my face and about me. Nothing in that is in good faith. I would take 1 million photos with Lady MAGA before I would give a person who would do that the time of day.
However, with his recent protest, it appears that Knowles' position is far more damning for him, especially when he has previously warned about the very thing he's engaging in, free speech absolutism, without any reason to do so.
Words, so yes, that's the kind of squishy Romney-type approach. Then there's the other approach, the more stalwart, obstinate approach, which, more of the rock-ribbed conservatives have leaned into. But they fall for a trap as well. They will say, I'm not going to go along with the new left-wing standard. I'm not going to go along with standards at all. I'm a free speech absolutist. I think you ought to be able to say and do whatever you want. I don't think you should ever be canceled. Now, I don't care if you show up to the water cooler wearing a swastika screaming Zig Heil. You can't lose your job because I'm against cancel culture, or whatever they say. That strategy, though I suppose I prefer the more stalwart people to the squishes, that strategy also gives the left what it wants because they abandon the traditional standards.
At the end of the day, Knowles' protest began and ended with what Fuentes said about him and not much else. If he was truly concerned about upholding a moral perspective about what is and isn't tolerable, he would apply that standard to Fuentes rather than coming up with some sort of excuse to defend him. The Daily Wire and others like them know that their audience is not on their side. They're also aware that Fuentes and his allies will not hesitate to harass them into oblivion. Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA have come face to face with this kind of vitriol and learned that lesson well.
E. Michael Jones' groundbreaking work, we now understand that sexual liberation is political control. It's a form of political control. And you have multiple times advocated on behalf of accepting homosexuality, accepting homosexual acts as normative in the conservative movement. How does anal sex help us win the culture war?
I'm going to let the gay man answer.
Wait a minute. So can I ask you a question? Can you have the balls to ask the gay man on the stage that question and don't defer to him? So ask me that question. I will answer you that question.
I'm
going to answer you. You already asked the question, so I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to ask you that question. This is America. This is the greatest freaking nation in the world. We realize that America is great because we have Western values. We realize that, let me finish, dude. We realize that gays and lesbians are able to contribute to American society in the same way that everybody else is. And let me tell you, when you continue doing that, okay, you realize that we are here. We are able to do everything. And let me tell you something as well. I served in the military, right? I served 5 years. I did an Iraq turn. What's up?
How does homosexual sex help us win the culture war?
Who said homosexual sex helps you win the culture war?
That is the question that I'm asking. Why are you promoting it?
Well,
all of this goes to show that the right has created a monster it can't control, and free speech, like every other issue they claim to care about, is subject to that monster's whim. You don't go all this time selling the idea that racism doesn't exist, and then cry racism when it starts to rear its head from within your ranks. The right depends upon maintaining this facade of consistency when the truth is they are afraid to lose their support. They're afraid of moralizing against the very kind of opportunistic nonsense that they have been flirting with for years. They will talk the talk, but they won't endorse the one method that would actually stop the horror that Fuentes and his colleagues perpetuate: a permanent ban. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. Right now I'm working on getting to 100 subs, and hopefully we can get an AMA or something along those lines going forward to celebrate that achievement. Also, I will be interviewing Jody from Imperial News on Saturday at 12:45 p.m. CST on my Twitch channel, and I hope to see you there. Thanks again, and have a nice day.